Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time, back with the one and only CEO of Hemlane. How you doing, Dana?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So in episode one, we talked about rent declines, what we have seen, what we experienced. We talked about regulation and things of that nature. In episode two, I want to talk about just rent increases, kind of the opposite of that. I have to assume in a lot of your areas, the last 6 to 9 months, you've seen some pretty, I don't know, significant rent increases out there. So I'm just curious, what are you seeing out there and about? Because you have a national purview that I do not have.
Yeah, so it is heavily dependent on your market. So when you look at the numbers, don't go and say, okay, this is what I should do.
Yeah.
You really do need to look at your market.
Yes.
We've seen the rental rates, and this is in just 2022, so I only have January's data. We've seen an increase of 5%, and that's of two different ways because I think this is super important to distinguish. It's those who have increased their rent with their tenants, or those who have told the tenants they're going to get an increase, the tenants decide to move out and they put it back on market for that much more. I think a lot of that, when you actually look at that data, it follows a lot of the salary increases that we're seeing. I think in January, it was reported nationwide, it was like a 4.2 to 4.9%, some sort of increase there. But there are a couple of things I would say. There are certain markets where we haven't seen it increase that much. It's at like 1%. We've also seen landlords who are super passive, who just say, I'm just going to keep it flat and just hope my tenant stays in the property. So we've seen it all over the board. Then we've seen 10% increases in a lot of these super hot markets where the tenant just decides to move out and then they relist it at 10-15% over, especially if the tenant had been in there sort of under market rate for a long time. But that's overall what we're seeing. Is as far as what you should do with your rental property, don't just take that and go and say, great, I'm going to increase rent by 5%. There's a couple of things you need to keep in mind. First is look at tenant landlord law and where you're located. There are certain places, California is one of them, where it's restrictive. It's going to be based on a cap or CPI, so the inflation rate. So that's number one. Number two is look at what else is on market, because what you will end up seeing is that every tenant is going to do that. When you give them a renewal notice, they are going to go immediately to Zillow or Zumper or Craigslist, whatever your market is where tenants are looking. They're going to go on there and they're going to say, I'm in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath that is, 1,300 square feet. What's the rate out there? And if you're not slightly below that and you're above that, they're suddenly going to say, maybe I should move because I don't know how much more it's going to increase the following year. And so it's really important to look at your market of what's on market, because that's exactly what your tenant is going to do, to see what else are the opportunities out there.
Yeah. It's really interesting that I had no idea where this was going to go, that you've only seen 5%, because again, if you believe the national media, which we all know is super biased and they cherry pick metrics, you would think rents are up 14-15% across the country. Now, there certainly are cities and there are instances where that's happening. But yeah, to hear nationally that maybe it's not that high is encouraging. Or maybe, go ahead.
I don't believe any of those stats in the media. And we saw it actually during COVID, because we saw headline news say 30% of tenants are defaulting on rent. Yeah. That was like reputable sources. And so we said 30%. Well, let's just look in our system. And so we went through and at a high, which was April of that first year of COVID, right when, or no, it wasn't April, sorry, it was July of the first year. So right when, suddenly there was enough time from March until July where jobs weren't coming back, things weren't opening. And we suddenly saw the highest that we saw was at 18% default. But headline news was saying that it was at 30%. And then we said, okay, it's there, but then what was the default rate beforehand?
Right.
Because, it
wasn't zero.
Zero. And so sometimes with the news, like the only numbers I can rely on are the ones that we have, because I know the data, right? I know our data analysts are pulling things correctly. Now, we might have some bias, like, in our system, tenants are paying online. So we are not getting some of those properties that
Yeah.
tenants are paying via cash. It's a Class D property.
Right.
So don't get me wrong, our numbers will also be slightly skewed
Sure.
to those who can pay online, who have a much more sophisticated model, and also have qualified tenants pretty well. Because if you're using Hemlane, you've done the background and credit checks, you've gone through precautionary measures, all of that. You've educated yourself. But yeah, sometimes with that headline news, I often wonder, and they'll cite a source, but then it's like, well, what markets did they look at?
Yeah, exactly.
What is the sample size of this? So yeah, I think it was after COVID, it really got me thinking of, okay, they want this headline news. They want.
You mean the media lies to us? Oh my God, I'm shocked.
So yeah, so they're not up that at 14. I actually, from a perspective of looking at the renewals that we have in Hemlane, it's been very, very rare to see over that 10%, in part because a landlord is saying, if this tenant is good and I want to renew with them, I'm going to, and I know that the headline news is saying inflation's at like, 8 to 10%, say some of it's above that, but I'm not going to do it way more than that. And so it's actually very rare for us to see it above 10%. And I'd push back and actually ask where those numbers came from.
Yeah, I would too. This is really cool. One of the things that I think I need to make a connection is between you and one of the three amigos, Dion from Dion Talk. Yeah. He has something he calls the binder strategy.
Yeah.
I think if you don't have access to my course, I need to give it to you, because he actually did a video on the binder strategy that you need to check out, because I think you could actually adopt that idea in the system to help landlords, because I think you have all the data, and I bet your team could package it up into a PDF and almost make it like an option. So I'll connect you to, so you can talk about it. But I think that would be valuable for everyone. Because again, I think you're right. The tenants always do the same thing. They're always afraid of the rent increase. They're going to go online and see what else other options are. And that's exactly what the binder strategy is, except Dion does it the old school way, like with paper and a binder.
Yeah.
But yeah, you put it together and then you hand it to the tenant. And then basically what Dion does is says, what's fair? And Dion has successfully negotiated tenant requested rent increases. Think about that. You're getting the tenant to ask for a number. Now, you as the landlord could always say no, but so far Dion's done this across, I don't know, 40 or 50 tenants over his investing career and never said no.
Yeah.
So I think the binder strategy combined, because you already have all the marketing stuff, and that's going to be episode 3, folks. We're going to get into the system and look at where you can market and gather data and see what's going on. But I think there's some power in the binder strategy. So Dana, where can people find your trial?
You can go to Hemlane, www.hemlane.com, and mention one rental at a time. Because if you decide to move forward, and we hope you do, with our property management, you get 20% off your first year as long as you mention one rental at a time.
And folks, if you're excited, you're energetic about being a landlord, you don't own anything yet, I would say do the trial just to pretend to be a landlord. Have some maintenance requests, have some difficult rent collection, see what's going on, have your friends play the game with you, make it fun, have it be a good time. So Dana, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for having me.